Hey everybody, how you doing? I'm Eric Gerlach, and this is a talk on the Jains of ancient India, the Tirthankaras, the forders of the stream, and Indian philosophy. So the Jain means the followers of the Jina, the conqueror, the one who conquers themselves. In the Chinese Tao Te Ching, an early verse reads, "Those who conquer others are powerful, but those who conquer themselves are truly strong." In Islam, the smaller jihad is the social struggle, and the larger jihad, the larger struggle, is the struggle with the self and self-discipline and transformation. The Jains of India worship and leave offerings for accomplished human sages who conquer themselves rather than gods, much as Buddhists do, leaving offerings as statues, much as Hindus do for gods and sages alike. Just as Buddhists revere the Buddha and other Buddhas, the Jains revere the Tirthankaras, the Ford makers, although not so many in Detroit. I do think there's a large Jain community in Toronto, Canada, nearby, but they haven't made a Ford lately. As far as all that, there is a sizable, that is the most sizable Jain community outside of India. In the American educational video game, The Oregon Trail, which I used to play as a child of the 80s and 90s, it would ask if you wanted to hire an Indian guide to help you ford the river, and then if you didn't, and if you just went across it, you often collapsed and lost a bunch of your stuff and then just kept going, like when Sally dies of dysentery or what have you. So, oddly enough, these are Indian guides who help you ford a river. They're just not Native American tribal peoples. They are folks who help you cross where the water is shallow enough for travelers, animals, and wagons to get across. The Tirthankaras are helping folks get to consciousness and enlightenment and stability and the goodness through the terrible and the bad and the watery chaos in the river of life, trying to find the firmament on the other side in the way of this metaphor. So you step on one thing, you say, hey, here's a solid rock, and oh wait, here is a crocodile. Don't step over there, kids. And that is what the Tirthankaras are supposed to be doing here and in Toronto, and most Jains, as with most Hindu priests, etc., are in India. I do believe it's actually part of what limits Hinduism and Jainism, which does not limit Buddhism, in a similar way that Judaism has been somewhat limited in ways compared to Christianity, is that the Jains and Hindus are mostly confined to India and really do not confirm priests, I believe. It's not confirmation. That's a very Catholic word. But that they do not ordain, is also a Catholic word, priests and nuns and monks much outside of India, and one is supposed to be somewhat in India proper, and that is limiting somewhat and there are dietary restrictions and others things which Christianity and Buddhism, and then later Islam, did not have such restrictions as much, and that allowed those to become more international and empire-building forces. The Jains very much led to the Buddhists. It has been said so. It is somewhat this and that. The Judaism and Jews very much led to the Christians and Muslims in the Abrahamic tradition. And Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam are the world's three largest cultures and the vehicle of much of the world's philosophy over the most amount of years, as well as science, technology, art, and everything in human culture. On the humanities or the sciences side, both ways, which are somewhat already in Sumer. So we have these Tirthankaras who are helping guide us across, and the Jains innovated several ideas which became central to Hinduism as well as Buddhism in India and then spreading outward, in northern India in particular. The idea that the cosmos works in cycles. Just as the sun rises and sets over the course of the day, the Jains argue that the consciousness of the cosmos awakens like the sun and then is at high noon, and then falls asleep in each great era, or kalpa. It's destroyed and reborn much as ancient Mayan astrologers predicted, supposedly, unless they did or didn't carry the zero the Mayans had and others didn't at the time, around 800, 900, that the world's going to be in the big crunch recycling program in 2012. We're not really sure. Today, modern physicists and cosmologists, I understood when I took a class here in Berserkly Town, that it isn't really clear that there was, at the time, going to be a big bang or a big outward to cold death or crunch and or recycling. And along with all of that, I think that things have been discovered in Hawaii that parts of the universe may be speeding up, which means the whole picture may be larger than people thought, and there could be energy coming into the universe in various ways, perhaps, if I am not totally mistaken, and these are not my areas, but I do hear this and that and hook it up to the material because ancient people are wondering about the world and what possibilities there are, and we still don't know many things as we speculate. And of course, listen to the physicists and others about that, and I will think they will tell you at some point we are pragmatists, but I am not sure, and I am not everyone. Not yet. We're getting there. So, the Jains, Buddhists, and Hindus, of course, see they all tend to share this awakening, sleeping cycle of the cosmos, the kalpas, and guess what their own Indian golden age of thought, which is right around the same time as the Greek and Chinese golden ages of thought, right around 500, 400, 300 BCE in India, Greece, and China. India a little bit ahead of Greece, Greece a little bit ahead of China, but that not mattering to me who's ahead or not, slightly, because it is a bunch of trading of culture in the wake of Egypt, Sumer, Babylon, etc. That these guys, these folks of India see their own era, which happens to be what Jaspers called the axial age of human culture, as the high noon of human thought, of course. And then what are we in now? Well, we're actually in big falling asleep crunch time, the time when we lose philosophy, religion, science, human thought. I don't actually suggest this, while it's not my place to criticize necessarily the others so much. People, one of the things I like to mention here, though, is there are Sumerian texts, there are Sumerian laments, a fine many Sumerian lament, of some of the earliest things that we have written down. 5,000 years ago, it is very clear that about 5,000 years ago, someone in Sumer, so 3000 BCE, so 2,500 years ago before this, said, well, we're losing the ways of the gods, people are running around, and the teenagers, and everybody's just doing what they want to, and hooking up, and being crazy, and being destructive. The world's gonna end soon, and that was said by human beings 5,000 years ago. So we may indeed see the cycles, and the rising and falling of culture. Do we have the gaining or losing of systems and intelligence, and is human intelligence and the brain dependent upon systems? Is it religion and science that give us thought? Well, Indian thought definitely sees itself as high noon, and everything is fading from it, and folks who are into modern science would see everything building up to it, and then possibly being lost. I read articles on Reddit, much phrased like that all the time. I have to say I'm much more of the sense that the human mind and brain have, if we watch the Amazonians on YouTube, and we can, and know they often have little to no use for mathematics like Siberians, I don't know if and if they argue with each other and seem like people, then perhaps there is a big crunch coming, or perhaps not, is all I will say, to be only that critical. So the Jains believe that Mahavir, may have heard the name, did not create or discover the truth as the central Tirthankara, central founder of the Jains, but he rediscovered it, and it is rediscovered as the pinnacle of each era by similar sages each age. Buddhists refer to Mahavira, as the boundless one, without attachments. Jains believe Mahavira is the 24th and final Tirthankara of our era, the pinnacle of enlightenment, liberation, and omniscience that can be achieved in this cycle, just as Buddhists say of the Buddha. And the Buddhists, like the Jains, seem to have had, by modern scholarship, it seems there was someone like Mahavira around the year 650 or so, 600 BCE. There was somebody like the Buddha around 550, 500 perhaps BCE, about 100 years between them. And then after a couple hundred years, we know that they had major followings. They had monks and nuns and orders of that, and disputes between these orders. Texts were getting written down, and people said, by the way, there were many Buddhas and many Tirthankaras leading up to the founder. That's what we know. So, of course, just saying that, I think you can understand. Given that evidence, people do think nowadays that perhaps the Buddhas and Tirthankaras led up to them, and perhaps that's a fine metaphor of many different forders lead up to the forder and the founder and the enlightened. The ways that it is codified as he is the 24th of the 24, Mahavira of the Tirthankaras, modern scholarship would say that is definitely the way it is. That is the way that the texts are written and are made, and these thinkers and these Indian philosophers and folks will tell you that human truth is perspectival and temporary, Buddhists and Jains alike, and that human words and texts are impermanent. They would tell you all of that about the material. So this couldn't offend them, I hope, very much. So, given that, the Buddhists do tip their hat to Mahavir and mention him, and Mahavir's name means great hero, and he is revered along with the others, the Tirthankaras, the ford makers, who conquered existence and the mind. Mahavir is said by the Jains to have fashioned 4 fords, the 4 ordered communities of Jain monks, nuns, laymen, and laywomen. Now notice is that yes, he seems to have become boundless and gained the indivisible enlightenment, and then he is the guy who says, okay, you have this community, this community, this community. Certainly by the time the texts are written down, there was this community, and this community. So scholars are critical of the Tirthankaras, as mentioned before Mahavir, as the Buddhas before the Buddha, but that is the wrestling with the text. According to the Jains, the first Tirthankara of our era was Rishabha, who discovered agriculture and thus founded civilization. Now, the ancient Chinese say the same about their sage kings. It's likelier agriculture and city-states disseminated to India and China and Europe and other lands, possibly much out of Africa, possibly decently out of Africa, and then originating in several different places in ways, or all of that being carried along. It is not clear, and human ingenuity and the brain and the mind are there the entire time. So it is hard to say. But the Jains, of course, say their ancient founders founded civilization, aka India, and Indian civilization. Well, that doesn't sound like any other civilization like Rome or others on Earth too much. Sounds like everybody, actually. Big mental group hug. So, yes, boundless Mahaviran group hug with all of that. So, the ancient folks of India, Greece, China, Egyptians, and Sumerians all say something similar. Rishabha means bull, and there is decent evidence of bulls identified with kings in the early Indus. This is something where you find in that area, in Greece, Rome, there are bulls, and there is depiction of power and the bull. The Romans are into Mithra, etc. That you then have a connection with the Hindu sacred cows, is that cows are symbolic, as are horses, as are chariots, of civilization. And having cows and having horses and having chariots is symbolic of strength, of development, of power, of might. Because if you're the guy with the cows, and you're the guy with the bull and the cows, and you're the guy with the horses and the chariots, you're the guy with the power in India or ancient Rome. There was a good book about trying to find the strange myths about the Thuggee cult that I read once, and a British guy goes to India, and a guy keeps asking him, how many cows do you got? And it's, yes, cows are power in a remote area of India while children are watching a Woody Woodpecker cartoon. I'm not sure what year that was supposed to have happened. But yes, is that ownership of cows. I own no cows, sadly. Again, it was only in the late 1800s that white men of the right Christian type could vote at all if you don't own property and you have no cows. So I have no cows. I rent an apartment. Should I be allowed to vote? I'm not sure. But along with the progress of civilization and all that since the just so recent 1800s, and the fording of the streams and the establishment of the orders, that you have here Rishabha, the bull, you have the Hindu sacred cows, and you have that having cows is having civilization. You can see also in Assyrian and Sumerian works, cows used to have longer horns. They were all Texas Longhorns when Texas was a thing to some, not many, and it wasn't Mexicana, but the bulls and the cows and the power and the farming and the agriculture and all that is something where they used to have longer horns, and their horns were bred to be shorter over time. So if you think of a cow with short horns, you are thinking of something somewhat genetically engineered back before people knew what genes were, and yet we're talking about genetics. You know, whatever birthright or descendants or race or current of a river one came from Adam, Eve, etc. So one of the central Jain pilgrimage sites is a towering statue of Rishabha's second son, Bahubali, the second Tirthankara of our era. I often show pictures of him, and he has vines growing up his decently naked body. According to the completely naked body, as we will talk about in the further videos of Jainism, the Jains believe in going without something fierce. Like Taoists, but a little unlike Taoists, a little, in interesting ways as such. According to the story and the legend of Bahubali, Rishabha's first son conquered all of India. Rishabha invents civilization. The next guy unifies India. Actually, that was Ashoka, and he tried to unify it with Buddhism, much as Constantine with Christianity, unifying lands, etc. There will be a video about that soon. And Rishabha's first son goes around conquering everybody and forcing everybody to submit to his power. So he invents civilization, aka India, and then he unifies all of India. But the younger brother, the second brother, Bahubali, whose name means strong arms, there is a lot of warrior culture and cows and bulls and warrior second-class sons in the Jains and the Buddhists. Mahavira and Buddha were supposed to be second-class warrior caste people who talk and act as if there's mobility and they can lead their own systems and religions. And just like with Greek and Roman stuff, there is a decent amount of war and militaristic imagery and metaphors. Religion isn't usually known, I was thinking about, so much for the militant metaphors as much as for a lot of it, whether or not you think it, compassion and acceptance and faith and tolerance and things like that. And then, of course, is known as human culture, and we know how that behaves. Like a magical candy shop, of course. So the first son, Rishabha's first son, conquers all of civilization, aka India. Bahubali, strong arms, also a warrior, very warlike, decides that he's going to fight his brother, I guess to liberate all of civilization, aka India, and then own it. The wise sages of the day declare that the two brothers are virtually invincible because they're so amazing, both having unsurpassed spiritual, mental, emotional powers. So the two brothers are asked to settle a dispute with 3 contests. It is said an eye fight, which I'm pretty sure is a staring contest. And now you have magical powers because I spoke. A water fight, I'm thinking again, I have a sister, a splash battle, is that what this is, in a pool? And a wrestling match. Bahubali bested his brother in all 3, but renounced his claim to the kingdom after he saw the pain and humiliation his brother faced in losing. So notice, you have with Heraclitus, Buddha, and many other thinkers of the ancient world of Greece, India, and China, a rejection of the physical in order to have the spiritual, the mental, the philosophical, as a rejecting somewhat of the physical. And this guy has strong arms, he can fight, he could own the kingdom if he wants to, but he specifically says, but that would humiliate. It is very Machiavelli. Machiavelli says, you can own everything, you don't want to be that guy. You don't want to be the cocaine queen pin, a la the White Widow, Griselda Blanc, I believe. You don't really want to be that person because you gotta there's a whole lot of subtraction involved, if you get what I mean. There's spreadsheets, there's subtraction, there's a little bit of division, there's dividing of families. There's a lot of stuff that happens. So you really don't want to have power and might over others rather than share it, because if you do, you're going to have to be brutal. And that seems to be what Bahubali realizes in besting his brother. So he renounced his claim to the kingdom. He's like, well, I just kept civilization unified, kind of like in China, the Qin leading to the Han. Well, I just kept civilization unified, but you know what? Nah, nuts to that. I'm out of here. And he goes into the jungle as a striver, and he goes to stand in the jungle for an entire year without moving, which he supposedly did without eating. I'm not sure how much this takes or how much this is popular on YouTube. But vines grew up his body, which you see in the images, until he became the first in our turn of the great cosmic wheel, our kalpa, our cycle, and he did it at about high noon, or leading right up in the minute before high noon, before Mahavira, before the 24th, well, actually here, you would have somewhat winding up to it, because he is effectively the second Tirthankara, and Mahavira would be the 24th, so there's a bit of time and process in between them, that he stood in the jungle for a year, and he obtained enlightenment. And he became, essentially, if you have heard of the Buddha, and the Buddha is supposed to have cracked through, broken on through to the other side, as we say in the Haight and out here in Berkeley town, and he achieved enlightenment. Essentially, the Jains come right before and as the Buddhists are happening, they are developing their systems of thought together. And the Jains are slightly ahead of the Buddhists in time. As far as historians are concerned, that is still debated. So you have here that Bahubali is said to have stood in the jungle for a whole year, and he became completely liberated and enlightened and achieved a kind of mental clarity, which was a cracking through into the complete and liberated truth, some sort of mental state which allows one to truly see and argue and all of that, which the Buddha supposedly is supposed to be according to Buddhism. And this is a core lecture not only for Indian thought and for Asian thought, but also for Buddhist philosophy, and Buddhism usually follows and does with my lectures. After the Jain material, we'll have a little bit more lectures on that. That the Buddha is himself supposed to be someone like this figure. He is someone who sat in the jungle for 49 days, I believe, after trying several things, including very Jain-like practices, and tried being essentially someone who was either a Jain or like the proto-Jains, and then cracked through like Bahubali and broke on through to the other side and was enlightened, and then taught a bunch about that to others. So anyone who wants to know anything about Eastern thought, Indian thought, Chinese thought, Japanese thought, should probably know the Jains, although they are not as well known as the Buddhists, and understand that Bahubali is supposed to be, according to the Jains, the guy who got enlightened like the Buddha, and before Mahavira. His father, the first Tirthankara, was not completely enlightened, but the second son, and following the father, the second Tirthankara was. And that is why he is such a revered founder, even though he is technically the second, and displayed so much with vines growing up his body still in India today and in Jain communities. All right, well, that is the first in several talks about Jainism. Following this, I have a video that is a somewhat illustrated video of the Jains' relativity in the elephant and the 3 points of Jain skepticism, which are quite powerful skeptical logic of India and very similar to Buddhist skeptical logic. I also have a video about the Nyaya, if you want more Aristotelian logic, but of India and the Nyaya and Gautama. And following that, we will have a video or two more about Jain mind over matter and practices of nonviolence. So yes, hopefully you will be good and completely enlightened at the end of this talk, and so I release you to do other things and talk to other people. Again, good night and good luck. Hopefully you're good and you're bad, or else you're already dead.